We first met this author last night, Steve, and now we're going to hear a little bit more about the book.
Yeah, Scott and Lisa, part one was last night. That came out pretty good, and tonight is part two. Well, tonight we continue with part two, Men in White, the comeback story of the Penn State football program with author Chris Raymond. Jim Coles picks up in the 4 years after 2012 as James Franklin becomes the head coach.
Coach Franklin, Christian Hackenberg,
Yep.
Saquon Barkley, and Trace McSorley.
Yep.
Let's start with Franklin. Your thoughts on how he has done since he took over a very difficult position?
Right. Well, I think there again, you're sort of trying to replace, Joe Paterno. You're replacing with, Bill O'Brien. 2 years in, you got to do this all over again, and you end up hiring this coach from Vanderbilt, who very few people knew about. The players were surprised he was the pick, but he did. He brought in some phenomenal recruits, and again, the program just didn't fall backward. At no point in that stretch did they have a losing season. I think that's a credit to those two coaches that they had come in.
And then Hackenberg took a beating, and beating physically, but also mentally.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of the story, the 60 players that I interviewed, people that I interviewed for the book, I think that his is the most important story. I mean, I think nobody paid a greater price for those penalties than Christian Hackenberg.
Maybe Hackenberg's the crux of the book, but the rebirth, the phoenix coming out of the ashes, it's Saquon that made it happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have to say, I think there's a large measure of kismet that happens in here. There's a lot of sort of courage, there's a lot of hard work to go into this. But the fact that that player of Saquon's caliber ends up on the staff on the team at Penn State, on that campus, in the school's hour of need, is still something that's remarkable to me.
And the last one is McSorley. Trace his lineage, pardon the pun, but a champion in high school at every season, and then brought that to Penn State, despite being, like me, 6 feet, 190.
Right, yes, and that was the big knock, right? He just wasn't big enough. He didn't have the sort of size to sort of compete in Division I. He ends up on the campus because James Franklin had recruited him and said, you're a quarterback. And again, when you combine him with Saquon Barkley, I mean, the highlight films week after week were just remarkable, I think, for college football to kind of see Penn State playing at that level, right? I think people were able to kind of rally around that team right away. And I do think that by then you were kind of like, okay, this program has succeeded. It's come back from what was almost a certain death sentence.
You can see the entire interview with Chris Raymond streaming on WNEP+.